Oh girl, do I have a treat for you today. I am talking with Dr. Charlotte Markey. She's a world-leading expert in body image research, and I'm so excited to share this interview with you guys. I think body image is something that we just don't talk about enough. I gave a presentation to my church actually last week, and one of the questions that popped up was one of the youth leaders asked, how do we handle the mass amount of young women who don't like their bodies? Like, what tools can we give them? And I didn't have a tool as the answer, but I think one of the best things we can do is just start talking about it. I remember being a teenager and feeling very insecure in my body, but not feeling like I could talk to anyone about it or not knowing who to talk to. And what's interesting to me is I don't think we necessarily outgrow that. I sit on the other side of so many conversations, and women across the lifespan struggle with how our body changes and ages. And I think the conversation gets a little bit different. Like, obviously, when we're teenagers, we're trying to figure out who we are. As young adults, we're trying to establish our identity. But then there is this whole concept of aging and postpartum bodies and postmenopause bodies. And all of these things come with just feeling uncomfortable in our own skin. And I think the best thing we can do is just talk about it. When we don't know how to handle something, or we feel any sense of shame creep up in how we appear and how our body is, I think, again, there's not like one quick fix, but there are discussions we can have. We can bring things out of the darkness of our head and let others know, like, you are not alone. We get this. We know it's uncomfortable. And I think when we come to each other with our full humanity, we can make a change in how we perceive our body to change across the lifespan, but also put us in a position of empowerment so we don't feel like it's all out of our control. Aging is the worst thing that could happen to us. Like, we actually put ourselves and position ourselves in the space knowing that we can take really great care of our body and be proud of how we stand and how we take up space in the world. I'm excited for this conversation, and I'm also so excited to let y'all know that you still have a chance to snag a spot inside the Empowered Eating Bootcamp. Guys, this is a 4-week bootcamp to help you get your environment ready to be an empowered eater. I was working with this client the other day who was having a really hard time implementing some of the things we had mapped out for her fuel plan. And when I said, okay, well, take me to your kitchen, because we were operating virtually. So she took her computer into her kitchen, and I said, let me see your fridge. And I looked in her fridge, and I was like, girl, this makes sense why you're not reaching some of your goals. You have nothing in here that's easy to grab and ready to go. And so we spent time preparing her kitchen. And I think that's 90% of the battle is just getting our environment set up for success. So inside this bootcamp, we're actually doing just that. And I'm so excited because just this month, I have partnered with my friend, Nicole Russo. Guys, she's a stylist out of New York City, such an incredible, gifted woman, but she is offering a free 30-minute closet refresh for anyone who joins in the bootcamp through the end of September. Now, I know that's today. This podcast is dropping and y'all have one day, so get yourself in there. I'm going to link that in the show notes. And once you go through the boot camp, I'm so excited because every single person gets to meet with me for 30 minutes. And I'm so excited about this because this is that point of contact that provides both accountability, but I get to meet you and see you guys face to face. So I can't wait to see you inside that boot camp. Snag that. It is on sale, and that free 30-minute consult will be available through the end of September. And we can't wait to see you in there. Let's get that environment set up for success. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this fantastic interview, guys. So glad you're here. This is a really, really important conversation that we all need to have for our inner 8-year-old, for our current 48-year-old self. No matter what age you are, I know you are going to pull so much from this interview. Hey, I am Jess, and I'm obsessed with all things nutrition, science, and helping you navigate this information while maintaining a deep sense of peace and empowerment in your body. I'm a registered dietitian who started out with an eating disorder and then fell in love with learning about how God intricately designed our bodies to be resilient and so much more than superficially beautiful. I am now a mama who loves to be healthy, not because of how it makes me look, but because of how it has transformed the energy I can give to my family, my friends, and you. On this show, we hit on real talk around the latest nutrition science and body image resiliency, all while balancing it between grit and grace. Think of this as your weekly audio coffee to encourage your empowered eating journey. This is the Fuel Her Awesome podcast. Well, Charlotte, I am so glad you're here. Thanks for coming on the Fuel Her Awesome show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Now, I told you when we first signed on, I have so many questions. I didn't even want to start talking because I just wanted to capture it here on this episode for everyone today. But before we dive into this incredibly important and powerful topic, I would love to know just a little bit about your background. What brought you to this field and to have such an awesome passion for this work that you do?
That's a good question. And I feel like everything brought me to this field. I always tell people I was a dancer growing up and the world of ballet was very body focused. So that's probably where it started. But then, like many of us growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was just a lot of diet culture. A lot of diet discussion that was just the normal. And it led me down a pretty dark path, the combination of those factors for a while. And then in college, I ended up studying psychology. That wasn't my initial intention. But I just loved it so much. It just made sense to me. It helped me understand myself and the world and hopefully, help other people. And so, that's, I started doing research on body image and eating behaviors my senior year of college, which was 1996 to 1997.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing it. So
it kept your interest, obviously.
Yeah. Every now and then I've had moments where, as a faculty member and a researcher, I kind of have an obligation to continue doing some research. And I thought, oh gosh, this is depressing or hard. And these issues are so persistent for people. And I wanted to veer off into something else. And I'll do a study here or there. And I just always come back. There's always something new going on in the world that's relevant. It was in the early 2000s. It was remember all the reality television shows about cosmetic surgery. They came on and I was like, okay, we have to study this. We have to figure out how this impacts people. And then, it's social media came to become such a big thing. Okay, we have to study how this, affects people. There's just always something going on in the world. It seems
always something. Yeah. You always have new material. Now, have you, I don't know if this is kind of an on the spot question, but I'm just kind of curious, what has been one of the most profound pieces of information that you've discovered in your research?
I mean, I hate to say my first study is where I peaked. I don't think that's exactly true, but back in 2000, we published a paper just showing that even 5-year-old girls had body image concerns, and they were linked with moms who had body image concerns. It was about 20% of those girls. So that was supposed to be baseline data. It wasn't supposed to be data where we actually saw body image or eating concerns emerging, but we did. So that was, a pretty profound way to kind of start off my research career.
Yeah.
I think, since then, some of my favorite work has been probably looking at body image and eating behaviors in romantic partnerships and how partners have the potential to affect one another.
Yeah.
And we had this one finding, I don't know when it was now, 10 years ago, probably at this point, but that basically the way to put it in lay terms was just that women were much more critical of their own bodies than their husbands were. So it was a study of married couples. And it's, it's somewhat intuitive, but it was just nice to see it.
Yeah.
Graphs and to have this data and to have women really thought in order to be comfortable with themselves and feel satisfied with their bodies, they would have to be underweight. They would have to be malnourished. Their husbands did not think that.
No, I've actually shared this on the podcast several times. I even brought my husband on to talk about this because one of the biggest shifts in my body image journey and like my relationship with him was when like we were first married and we were talking about lingerie and I was like, I don't look like the Victoria's Secret models, right? Like it makes me uncomfortable because I don't look like that. And he just kind of laughed at me and he was like, "Do you think I'm thinking of the Victoria's Secret models like and comparing you?" And it was just this eye-opening moment of like, oh, wait, my brain works that way, but
Right.
his brain does not. And so you found this in graph format and
Right. So
actual data.
exactly. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
almost the exact same sort of finding essentially, right? But it was, and it was like over 100 couples, so
Wow.
like 220 people or something, and they were all married couples and in their 20s for the most part. So they were pretty newly married, but
Sure.
still like,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay, so you're talking about a wide range of age here, all the way from 5 years of age, starting to demonstrate some of these body insecurities into early marriage. And we know it goes well beyond that. And you've written several books on this topic. We're going to dive into your most recent one here in a bit. But I'm curious, Charlotte, how do body image challenges like shift across the lifespan? Because I think we don't talk about this enough. We talk about how it shows up in puberty, but I think we don't talk about how it might show up in our 30s and 40s as we age. And then women get kind of stuck thinking that something's wrong with me if I feel this way. And when in reality, like they're not alone. So can you talk to us a little bit about the shift in body image and what you see in the data coming up for women across the lifespan?
yeah, so I think if you think about it developmentally, some of what we see going on in even the preschool and like kind of kindergarten years is
Mm-hmm.
that kids start being able to think about like comparing a little bit and trying to figure out like I'm a girl, I'm a boy, right? So this is when young kids like to categorize things,
Yeah,
and some of that sort of categorizing and try to make sense of the world um can lead to comparisons or like this is good, that is bad, right? And we want kids to think more flexibly about bodies and food and all of that, but it's really normal when you're 5 that you can't quite do that, right? That you just don't have the cognitive capacity yet. So that's kind of where some of this is starting to emerge, is just in sort of normal developmental processes in terms of cognitive development. And then puberty starts now for girls around 8 or 9 years of age, oftentimes. And
mhm,
so it's really like we go almost from that early sort of cognitive stuff that's going on.
yeah,
A few years later, we're in puberty. And some of those changes are not always visible initially, right? So a lot of them are internal and hormonal changes, or they're not secondary sex characteristics, right? It's
sure.
not breast or genital changes, so they're less obvious things maybe, but all of that can sort of trigger these concerns. And it may not be body dissatisfaction overall, but it definitely draws attention to the body, right? When you start having hair in places you didn't used to,
Right.
or pimples or whatever it may be. Most of this is
Mhm.
not the sort of changes that girls will see in the media and think, oh, I'm really excited that now I'm getting pimples, right? Because
Right.
they understand that's not a socially desirable change.
Mhm.
So we, then girls are exposed to um, more media and more peer influence also during the teen years.
Mhm.
And so the combination of puberty and the social world sort of widening is really important in terms
Yeah.
of shaping body image. But then we start to see romantic relationships play a role.
Mhm.
Um, and most young people have some relationship experience, but not necessarily serious or significant ones where they're going to
Mhm.
have conversations like you mentioned you had
Yeah.
with your husband, until they're in their 20s at least. And so
Right.
then we start to see those forces become more relevant. And then if women have children, often still the average age is in their late 20s.
Mhm.
Um, Certainly people have kids at all different ages now, but on average, it's like late 20s still for
Mhm.
marriage and to start a family. And that creates a lot of body changes
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Uh, Pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding, for many women, there's multiple rounds of that.
Yeah.
And so some women spend a decade even in sort of a phase of pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum and breastfeeding. And that's just, you kind of lose your body to caring for other human beings during that phase. And for some women, then there's not a huge period of time when that ends, and then you'll start to experience perimenopausal changes as soon as even the early 40s.
Right.
And that can go on for, as I'm personally learning, a very long time.
Yeah.
A decade or so before menopause even hits. And, and all of this, right? All these different changes are either social or cognitive or actual physical changes or some combination.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when we talk about trying to understand body image, it's like a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something we haven't fully appreciated or talked about enough, that it's normal to feel unsettled because things are changing physically or socially or cognitively.
Right. Yeah, I'll never forget one of my first mentors when I was early on in my career, starting to work with eating disorders. And she was talking about body image. And she goes, there's eating disorders, and then there's body image, and then there's aging. So, like, at some point, we as women are going to always be asking this question of how do I connect and appreciate and understand my body without judging it, because it is always changing. Yeah, wow. It is a moving target. I really like that.
Yeah. And I think too, there's a lot of like, just as you start to maybe feel good, right? Or you just start to get through a phase, another phase hits.
Kicks in.
And it's almost like I remember when my kids were little, my mom kind of warning me, even like, once you get them to sleep through the night, then something else is going to happen. Like, don't get complacent, right? Like, there's always something. And I was like, oh, darn, and it's kind of a similar thing, but we just don't talk about it very much.
No, we don't. And I think, we often look to control our bodies, which just how you laid that out, there's no control, right? Like there's puberty. And then if someone goes through pregnancy, there's so much out of your control there. I'll never forget, I'm a dietitian. And so I know all the target weights we're supposed to be within. And I gained far more weight than I was, quote, supposed to. And I'll never forget, the doctor goes, you've gained a little bit more than the recommended amount. Are you aware of what you're eating? Do you feel comfortable knowing what you're eating? In my head, I was like, like my cat claws were coming out, because I was like, I'm a dietitian. I do this for a living. Yes, I know. And yet my body's out of my control. And then as we know, going into perimenopause and the hormone, that's a whole nother ball game. So there's so much out of our control. And yet somewhere along the way, we got this message that it's within our control.
Right. And if you don't feel like it's within your control, the message also is you're just not trying hard enough.
Oh, yeah. Something's wrong with you. Yes.
Right. Or try something different, or here's another product or another plan, or, whatever it may be. And instead of like listening to your body and trying to do what feels good for you, you gotta get this supplement or something.
Right. Yeah. Or the next latest and greatest thing. Now, I really appreciate this concept of positive body image. And I think when I was reading some of the research on this years ago, I was really pleased to understand like the definition of positive body image. I think we're told it's like, oh, loving your body, but it actually goes beyond that. Can you talk a little bit more about this idea of positive body image?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's not just loving our body all the time, which is basically impossible, because our bodies are difficult and finicky and constantly changing, as we've now established. So it's so much more about respecting your body, taking care of your body, trying maybe to understand your body, or have, flexibility in how you think about your body, enjoyment in your body, and gratitude for what your body can do. I think those can be harder for people, but can be an important part as well. To try to nurture some sense of, feeling like, wow, I'm really proud of myself for what, whether it was I birthed a child, or I ran a marathon, or I, cleaned my house all day today, whatever it may be. Our bodies are physically just really cool. And I don't know why we don't talk about that more. And they're so resilient. We're so mean to them so often, especially women, I think.
Yes.
And I mean, not because we want to be, but because I think we've been sort of sold this myth that we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so positive body image, it's not like, oh, I love myself, I'm amazing, or some kind of egocentric trip. It's
Mm-hmm.
much more about, I don't know, I like the term self-respect a lot, and
Yeah.
self-care is kind of cheesy and overused, um, but both of those things I think of often when I'm feeling, less sort of gracious towards my body. I think, like, what do
Sure.
you need? How are you going to take care of yourself because you feel this way?
Yeah.
What would make you feel better?
Yeah, that's so good. Like I kind of think of it like relationship. I've been married almost 18 years now. And I love my husband. I don't always like him, and he knows this,
Yeah,
right? And yet those
completely.
moments, right? Yeah, like we are both humans and we have things that irritate each other. And yet in those moments when we irritate each other, it's not like I'm abusing him, right? I
Right,
don't I don't
right,
beat him up. I don't cut
right,
him down. I just kind of go, okay, well, what do I need to do in this circumstance to maybe
right,
understand him,
right.
to love him unconditionally, and like if we could just extend that to our own body, I think we'd have a totally different relationship with it.
Yeah, and just ourselves in general, in some
Hmm.
ways, right?
Hmm.
We're much better at, being sort of forgiving and patient with other people, and less so
Yeah.
with ourselves, oftentimes.
Yes. 100%. Yes, man, we're our own worst critics. So, can you talk to me a little bit more about like what you found in your research in terms of this positive body image, like across the spectrum? If someone's going through a pregnancy, if someone's going through perimenopause, if someone's gained postmenopausal weight, like how do we develop that positive body image resiliency when we really have a heart, we can't control our body?
Yeah. I wish I could say the research is all cut up and had answers to all those questions.
Hmm.
I guess what I can say sort of broadly is that positive body image does seem to be pretty protective. So
Mm.
when you nurture positive body image, or you try to focus on all those different sorts of elements of it, the different facets that I described, like self-respect and self-care, that seems to be protective in terms of then, you know, eating more intuitively, um, engaging in activity that's going to be more adaptive or better suited for us, right? Like not too extreme or not something that we don't really like, or not pushing ourselves too much. Um, it also seems to just be really psychologically healthy. That positive body image is just correlated with so many mental health outcomes, it
Mhm.
seems. So
Yeah.
it's not just, protective against eating disorders, but like depression and wellness more
Yeah.
generally are associated. So, it may not sound like rocket science because it's pretty intuitive.
Mhm.
And yet I think that if we all appreciated more that, hey, if we nurture this sense of self that's just more positive,
Yeah.
it will kind of potentially solve a lot of other problems.
Yes, it will. It absolutely will. So, can you talk to us too a little bit more about this idea of like the external influences on how we take care of our body? Because you mentioned the relationship study. I think that's fascinating and how romantic relationships can impact our body image, but also social media, because that is a whole nother influx of information about how we are to care for our body. Because I think a big part of what you mentioned about this intuitive way of taking care of our body gets eclipsed by some of these things that are around us. So, what have you noticed about these influences and what can we do about them?
Yeah, so social media has really changed our media landscape, and that most of us are in touch with different, influencers, friends,
Hmm.
celebrities through social media on
Hmm.
kind of a constant basis almost, or at least more multiple times a day,
Yes.
right? And, in contrast to like when we were growing up, I used to wait for like my monthly edition of Teen Magazine or Glamour magazine to come in the mail. It was like once a month. And there was research way back then, that was the 90s, showing that like women's magazines and that form of media could be detrimental to body image, right? So now social media is like that on steroids, because it was just this, relatively infrequent and just such a smaller influence compared to this daily, hourly, right? So that's a big part of what we have to be aware of, is just sort of the constancy, the omnipresence of social media. And then another piece of it that's really changed is the interactive nature, sort of the almost, it can elicit sort of compulsive behavior, kind of constantly checking, and then that can lead to constant comparison, constant self-surveillance, because you're constantly checking other people. So there are some really unique features of social media that make it different than media we've engaged with before. And in terms of how it can be detrimental, we have enough studies, I think, at this point to suggest that it is a risk factor when it comes to body dissatisfaction. It's not like an easy straight line, because we also know that especially young people are more vulnerable, and young people who maybe are already dissatisfied with their bodies may then engage with this media more, because they're looking for answers, right? Or they're looking for validation. They're looking for beauty related information, appearance related products. And then in some of my own research, we've found that, engagement with that aspect of social media that's more appearance focused can be much more problematic than if you engage with, like if you're messaging your best friend, or, me and my best girlfriend, we sent each other silly memes. Like, I don't think that's hurting our body image, at least not yet. But, for young kids, they're really drawn to things like beauty tutorials and what I eat in a day, and these sorts of instructions for life. And that can be particularly problematic.
Yeah, it blew my mind. This was a few years ago when I learned more about the algorithm and how it's driven and how it's picking up on what you say and like the advertisements you look at. But it just blew my mind one day when I looked at my discovery feed, because of the conversations I was having with clients about body and about food and exercise and some of the stuff we'd Google. I mean, my discovery page was so triggering. I mean, it was Fitspiration on Fitspiration and skinny six-pack girls everywhere. And I just thought, oh my gosh, here I am, almost in my 40s in a healthy relationship. And, I've done a lot of work and I feel pretty well established with who I am and the mark I want to leave in the world. And yet that stuff it bugs me. It's triggering to me. I'm so concerned about these teenagers now who seem to be very stuck, and I'm seeing it in the clients I work with, who are just can't stand their body, can't stand their face. I mean, I was working with a 14-year-old just last week who we were trying to work on some body acceptance and appreciation. I said, well, what's one thing you like? It could be your hair, it could be your eyebrows. And she couldn't think of one thing, not one thing. And so how do we equip our kids to fight against some of these battles? Because it does, like, honestly, Charlotte, feel a little overwhelming. Not a little, very overwhelming.
Right. I mean, I totally agree, right? Like, I think that as adults, we find it overwhelming, and our brains are fully developed and we have a lot of life experience compared to young people, right? So their brains are not fully developed. They are not as good at, thinking more abstractly and being able to, think about it like, okay, this has a context and this context is important, right? Young people just, they don't necessarily have the brain development to do that very well, and they don't have the life experience. And so I think that we really, as adults, have to think more about, we're probably not going to successfully take it away from them. So can we limit, right? Are there some boundaries we can help set? And I do think the discussion that's really ramped up in the last 6 months or so about limiting like phone use at schools is going to be important if that becomes just normalized,
Mhm.
that's going to make it easier for kids to actually then put their phones away and focus on school. And I think that can be a really positive change if it's, again, it kind of has to be done as a group project. It can't
Yeah.
just be that you leave it on the teachers or the parents. Like there has to be some institutional support, like at the school level, I think, to
Mm.
really make this more possible. But we're seeing that, we're seeing a lot of, I think, policymakers
Mhm.
and advocates and people involved in public health who are like, wait a second, they're thinking about their own kids too,
Yeah.
right? Their kids are growing up in this context and they're nervous.
Yeah.
And so I think that suggests, I think that we're going to hopefully get a better handle on things, but
Yeah.
we do have this cohort of kids, which my own kids were teenagers during this time where it was like they had a pandemic, they
Mhm.
were home,
Yeah.
they were teenagers, and social media was a lifeline.
Yeah.
So we didn't try to get them off of it. We wanted them to engage with the world
Mhm.
because they were stuck at home for over a year.
Mhm.
Um, Depending on where you live, I guess some kids went back to school sooner,
Right. Right.
but
But still.
we are, I think, potentially seeing some fallout from that as these kids now, almost it'll be 5 years later this spring, are in college. They're still experiencing some mental health issues. I'm not gonna, I would never say it's all, social media's fault. I'm not trying to point the finger in
Mhm.
that way or say that that's the only factor at play here.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't think it's irrelevant. And
No, it's a big player in this one for sure. And I think to your point, what you said earlier is like if they're already struggling with it and now you put some of these images, it can make it even worse, which is what of the things that's really concerning, or part of what's really concerning for me is like if you have a kid in a vulnerable state, now they're pausing on they're looking for answers, just pausing on the girl with the green smoothie doing whatever. And now the algorithms grabbed that and said, oh, they like these images, let's feed her more. And yeah, and it just the comparison game that social media brings out. So can we talk a little bit about comparison culture and what advice do you have for individuals trying to navigate that with their body image?
so social comparison has been studied in terms of social media and body
Mhm.
image, and it is often thought to be one of the primary reasons that social media is detrimental, right? Because if
Mhm.
we did view this stuff and our gut response was like, oh, isn't that lovely? I hope she likes her green smoothie.
Yeah.
It wouldn't really be a problem. But instead, what happens is we see that and we think, oh, I don't make green smoothies. Maybe I should be
Mhm.
doing that for myself. We start comparing
Yeah.
and then we start feeling bad about ourselves. And so we have to stop the social comparison from happening. And I think a really important part of that for young people in particular is uh, to really try to support media literacy and
Mhm.
help young people understand that a lot of what they're seeing is not real, right? Or
Mhm.
it's not reality in terms of what even makes sense for them to compare themselves to. So
Mhm.
especially if they're really um, following like celebrity type culture or even influencer culture, these are not like your peers. These are not, I mean, they're not our peers either,
Right.
to be
Right.
clear, right? I mean, even if there are closer to age, well, actually, they're probably closer to young people's age than mine at this point, but still, age aside, it's like these are people who have stylists and
Yes.
chefs and, people that edit their photographs. And, like this is really, really curated what young
Yeah.
people are seeing. And one thing I like to tell young people too is remember, like those people you're saying, it's their job to look good,
Yeah.
sell you a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like the rest of us want to look good. That's very normal. And that's like nothing to be embarrassed about. But like, that's not my primary job.
Mm-mm.
Right. And I don't want that to be my primary job. Like, I want to use my brain and other parts of who I am to make my impact on the world. And that's not to be critical of how other people
Yeah.
choose to present themselves to the world. But I think that helps me feel better about like, listen, I'm never going to look like that because that's not how I want to spend all of my time.
Totally. Yeah. I remember this quote one time that said everybody has the same 24 hours in a day unless you're Beyonce. She has 5 assistants, a chef, and this whole list. And I was like, oh, that is such a great way to put it. That like we
Yeah.
just have different
Right.
teams behind us, right? And
Right.
resources. And yeah. And again, like looking at, okay, what is my role in the world? But so how do we communicate this to younger folks though? Because I do think there's this huge drive to be an influencer right now. I think one of the last like surveys I looked at, you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up and they want to be an influencer. Very few are wanting to be surgeons or astronauts anymore. So how can we talk to this younger population when that may be what they want?
I think this gets tricky, and this is where like I try to put my psychologist hat on.
Mhm.
And I think if you're an adult and you're saying to a kid who has a dream of being an influencer, that's stupid, you can't do that, then they're gonna respond to us as adults by like, you don't understand, you're out of touch, you're an adult, you don't get me, right? And so we don't want to set up that dynamic, I think, in the conversation. It might be better to say like, well, okay, that's one possibility. What do you think you would like about that as your
Mhm.
job? Do you see any downsides, right? Ask lots of questions and try to
Love it.
listen, try not to be judgmental. And, my son, when he was younger, wanted to be like a YouTuber briefly, I think.
Mine does right now. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
They're in that
And
age.
he was kind of good at some of that, I thought. But I was like, listen, you need a backup plan.
Mm.
Okay. Like we can take this as seriously as you want to,
Yeah.
but we need a backup plan because not everyone makes it. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of luck involved, in terms of who's an influencer, who's a movie star, who's a famous singer. Like there's just probably not just talent, but a lot of luck
Yeah.
involved. And so I think, again, not to belittle kids or make them feel bad about their dreams, but ask a lot of questions and then also, suggest that they have a backup plan.
Yeah.
Get
I
them
guess
thinking
it,
about more options.
right. I'm thinking of like, I wanted to be a professional soccer player and I was a good soccer player growing up and my parents did not squash that dream. They said, cool, you're gonna have to work really hard. Also, what would you like to study in college while you're pursuing your,
Right?
or what trade
Yeah.
school would you like to go to while you are pursuing this dream? I like that. I really like that. And I think it's a way to connect with them at the same
Yeah.
time, because you're right, we can't disconnect. And that's probably one of the biggest things I've come up against, Charlotte, is like when I'm talking to teenagers about social media, my brain is like, well, let's just get off social media. I very quickly want to just say like, turn it off. But it is their lifeline. It is their means of communication. And so we have to teach them how to work with it and in a healthy way. So can we shift gears here and talk a little bit about um, developing positive body image as adults? Because I love how you kicked off this conversation with that, one of those initial studies you did, and how children as young as 5 show concerns about their body if they see that in the women in front of them. And I think that puts a big spotlight on us as moms and aunts and teachers and leaders to do our own work and feel confident in our bodies. So let's talk a little bit about how women, as we age, can develop a sense of positive body image.
So I think what's a really important thing to appreciate is that this may not come naturally to most of us, and it
Good.
might not be easy. And that's okay, right? That doesn't mean you don't try. I think it's sort of a fake it till you make it situation for
Mhm.
most of us. And if
Mhm.
you just appreciate that, it will feel a little bit easier.
Mhm.
And then really consider a few things that I would say you shouldn't do. So don't disparage your body in front of your kids,
Mhm.
right? And many of us grew up in households where it was totally normal to have people, saying things like, do these pants make my butt look big, or do
Yeah.
I look fat in this, or whatever? Just you're not going to do that anymore. You're not going to do that in front of your kids. You're not going to normalize that kind of
Mhm.
conversation. Is it going to happen in your head still? Yes, at least for a while.
Mhm.
But as you externalize it less, it will happen in your head less too.
Mhm.
So you will benefit in that way. So I think that's one of the first things really important is to just stop being disparaging about bodies.
Mhm.
And even maybe try to be positive about bodies. If not your own, then somebody else's. And I always think of this like when you're watching the Olympics or a sporting event, and it's like, I mean, obviously these are not average people typically, but it still feels like an opportunity just to kind of stand in awe at what the body can do and to talk more about like, wow, that is so cool. Can you imagine? Like, I can't imagine my body doing that, but it's so cool what the body is capable of, right? To kind of focus on some positives,
Mhm.
um, even about yourself if you can, right? Because then we're modeling that for our kids. If we're
Mhm.
like, yeah, I really like the way this looks on me, that's a very, very different message
Mhm.
than, does this make me look fat? Should I go change?
Right.
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 Um, so we want to work on that. And then another real basic one is to really be careful how we talk about food,
Mm.
right? I think that so many of us moms grew up learning to have the mentality that you want to basically eat as little as possible and
Yeah.
certain things, right? Like this is a restriction game essentially.
Mhm.
And instead to really talk about food as a form of self-care.
So
How
good.
can we nourish our bodies, right? Or you have a soccer game. We need to make sure that you have time to have lunch before your soccer game so that you are nourished and ready to play. To really talk about food as essentially empowering us, not something
Mhm.
we're trying to avoid,
Mhm.
and really trying to help our kids stay in touch with their bodies
Mhm.
so that, they really basic thing, but eat when they're hungry, stop when they're full, feel flexible in terms of what they try. Don't feel like it's all good or bad or they're good or bad, right? It can be very hard to parent. I mean, it's hard to feed kids. It's very hard to feed,
Mhm.
especially young kids. Um, but the more we try to sort of control their food environment, oftentimes the more the whole thing can just implode or backfire. So, um, how we frame it, how we talk about food is really critical.
It's so critical. I love that. Okay, so not speaking poorly about your body in front of your kids. And in fact, getting curious and maybe even speaking positively about your body. And this is something, I mean, this is one of the tools I love to talk through with clients is when they're really feeling badly about their body. I'm like, what would you say to your daughter? What would you say to your niece? What would you say to the girl you're mentoring? And of course, the words that they would say and give to some other female would never be what they're giving to themselves. But what's really cool about what you just said is you're asking and inviting people to actually practice it out loud with the people around them to say, look in the mirror instead of like focusing on all the parts we don't like, actually maybe go, oh, hey, maybe I do like my hair. Oh, do you see how
Yeah,
pretty my hair looks today? And like teach them to
right.
see
That's
the
okay.
positive. How
Yeah.
healing is that?
Yeah. I mean, we should all like some parts of ourselves, right? Maybe it's a
Mhm.
lot to say like we should all like everything. Maybe that's even a little bit like out of touch. But we should on balance
Mhm.
feel like we like certain things about ourselves and
Yeah.
we're okay with that. And
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that we're full of ourselves or we're going to go around bragging or, you know, but it just means that we are comfortable in our own skin. And I think that's what we want for the next generation. I think most of us who have been moms who were, raised in the diet culture of the 80s and the 90s know that that's not what they want for their
Mhm.
kids.
Yeah.
And so we have to set a good example. And it can be very hard. Like I said, fake it until you make it.
Yeah. But those words we speak have power. And just as much as we're speaking poorly about our body and that starts to develop a thought pattern in our head and a way we treat our body, we also have the power to say positive things about our body. My husband, he has been so good for me. He's just one of these naturally confident guys. Like he's always been that way. My mother-in-law said when he was a little kid, he was just kind of like, yeah, I'm amazing. Like he just, and it's not like in a cocky way. It's in like a matter of fact way. And it's so cool because I see it in my son now. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
say things like, hey, his name's Bruin. I'll say, Bruin, your hair looks really cool. And he goes, mm-hmm. And did you see these sunglasses I paired with it? And like he adds to it. And it's a sense of confidence. But It's something that I think I didn't naturally have. I've just always naturally been very insecure, very concerned with how I'm presented to the world. We could dive into the million different reasons we all come to that, but long story short, that's how I have grown up and experienced the world. And so seeing someone have that level of confidence was really cool. And so I just decided one day I'm going to try to, like, what would my husband say or do in this situation? Like, he would wear the shirt anyways. He would go to the workout class anyways. He would show up and do this thing anyways. And what was really crazy is that there was a snowball effect with that.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think that, I've done some research on boys, and so
Mhm.
it's not that boys aren't at risk. They are definitely at risk for body image concerns and eating disorders, but we do still see, I think, a higher level of risk among girls and women, and a lot
Mhm.
of it has to do with how we're socialized.
Mhm.
And we are supposed to be people pleasers. We are supposed to be accommodating. We're supposed to be caretaking of others. And a big part of that is like we can't be too into ourselves. We are supposed to be kind of for others.
Mhm.
And we have to work on shifting that narrative if we want our kids to have, more for not just themselves, but for the relationships they have, the
Yeah.
careers they have.
Yeah.
Um, because I think there's still a long way to go, right? If you are a nearly middle-aged or middle-aged woman that spends any time out in the world, that gender equality does not actually exist yet, and we want our girls to grow up feeling confident in who they are and not
Mhm.
being afraid to ask for what they deserve.
So good. So good. Well, you have poured your heart into research, authored several books, but the most recent one is Adultish. Can you tell us a little bit behind what you have poured into in this book?
Yes. So Adultish is the third book in this body image book series
Mhm.
after a body image book for girls and then a body image book for boys.
Mhm.
And so this is intended essentially to pick up where those books left off.
So cool.
So I talked about puberty and sort of the tween years and early teen years in those books. And then Adultish picks up, I think, where teens start to feel like they want to be adults. That's the
Mhm.
title. And into, early actual adulthood when we're still trying to figure out how to be adults.
Yeah.
And what I really wanted to do with this book was, I think, elaborate on some of what was in the other books and
Mhm.
and bring in some new topics. Um, and I loved writing the books for girls and boys. I'm actually revising the girls' book right now, so we'll have a second edition out
Oh, cool.
in a year or so. Um, but the target audience is basically 12, and so you have to simplify things to keep it accessible when that's your audience. And
Mhm.
I think as a researcher, that can be hard for me. I want to like pile on the layers of nuance and
Yeah.
complexity. And here's one more thing that I want you
Yeah.
to know. I mean, in fact, this book was 100 pages longer in its first draft.
Wow. Wow.
Um, the Word document was 100
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah.
And my editor was like, "Oh no."
Bring this down to their level. Bring it
Yeah.
to a place where they can hear
Yeah.
it and use
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And so that was, I mean, that was hard to make Adultish even as concise as it ended up,
Uh-huh.
but it's still, there's a lot more nuance in it than the books for girls and boys. And it's also, I think, just really important to have resources
Mhm.
for young people as they become adults,
Mhm.
because we know this is a vulnerable time in terms of mental health, that biological predispositions towards things like depression and anxiety and
Yeah.
start to emerge often during this developmental phase. We have a cohort of kids, like I said, who grew up during the pandemic are
Mhm.
potentially even more vulnerable because of some of their life experiences.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not positive how I feel about the phrase that we have a mental health crisis per se, but I do think we need resources
Mhm.
for teens and young adults that are accurate and evidence-based,
Yeah.
because they are getting most of their health information from TikTok. They absolutely are.
So I know I'm shaking my head because I often go to sports teams because I'm a sports specialist. And so I'll go. And one of my favorite things to do is ask, what have you learned on TikTok about food this week? And let's see if it's true or not. Let's talk about it because it is, you're right. So your book is providing this incredible resource for them. Can you tell us what is your favorite? I call it a body image bounce back tool. So what is your favorite body image bounce back tool that you talk about in the book?
I think a quick gratitude exercise can be
Mm,
good. And some of the research we've done in my lab actually does show that these have some real efficacy. And we even have just in the lab asked people like list out 3 things you like about yourself.
mhm,
All right, why? And so when you kind of are in a like I hate everything rabbit hole, I think that it can be good to just focus on some positive.
mhm.
I think also sometimes distraction is valuable
Yeah,
because there's so, I mean, as a psychologist, usually, distraction and avoidance aren't always the best coping skills,
sure.
but we're so inundated with sort of appearance focused information that I think sometimes removing our attention from that is really important, right? Like get
Mhm,
outside in nature and go on a walk
mhm,
or, go sit in your backyard and read a book or whatever. Like
mhm,
distract yourself from all that sort of information that we do tend to default and compare ourselves to,
mhm.
right? So kind of just getting away from,
So good.
yeah,
Yeah, well, I think a lot of at the heart of the body image is wanting to fix your body, right? And so when we distract ourselves, we remove ourselves from the fixing or doing mode and just back to the mindful and present mode.
yeah.
One of my favorite, I read this study a really long time ago, and I wish I could find it. Maybe you know where I can find this, but they were looking at when people focus on parts of their bodies that they don't like. And so
Mhm.
they showed them images of, or they showed them the scene from The Lion King where Mufasa dies. So a really sad, emotionally triggering event. And then they had them stand in front of a mirror and they observed where their eyes moved to see where they hyperfixated. And they found that after watching that, they tended to hyperfixate on the parts of their body that they had previously identified as not preferring. And then they did the same thing where they showed them like puppy videos and cat videos and baby laughing videos. And then they observed these same people again. Where did their eyes track? And they tracked more towards the parts of their body that they liked. And so I've always taken that like, hey, if you just cannot get like go watch some puppy videos, go watch some
Yeah,
babies laughing.
yeah,
Like, don't fix
right,
anything. Just feel good for a second.
right, right. I think that's true, right? There's a lot of the media around us and the messaging that we all experience that just
Mhm,
can bring about negative mood. And that
mhm.
negative mood then can be like, I feel bad about everything,
Sure.
including. And I think that you're right. Sometimes it's just like you just have to get in a better mood,
Yeah.
a better frame of mind.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to get in a better frame of mind going on social media.
Mm-mm.
So we want kids to understand that.
Yeah.
Um, even as much as I do really like the idea of creating uh, parameters for kids in terms of social media use, and not allowing them to use it in class and things like that.
Mhm.
I also think we just need to focus more probably on really teaching media literacy. Like
Yeah.
this should be a public health priority in my mind.
Absolutely.
Why are we not bringing that to kids in middle school or high school or all the grades, right? It's like we bring all
Yeah.
health information to school in the United States, and it's not even always medically accurate. That's a law in some states that, like, this is kind of tangential, but in Texas, at least for a long time, I don't know if it's still true. It was a law that sex ed did not have to be medically accurate in Texas. Like
Oh
it did
my
not
gosh.
have to be. So like, what is it then? Like, what are you what are you teaching?
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
so we're bringing what may or may not be like actually accurate
Oh,
information about all sorts of health topics to kids in schools. Um, but I feel like media literacy would be pretty uncontroversial and that we should just be bringing that because kids, like I said, they're getting their information on TikTok. So teach them how to parse what they're seeing on TikTok, for God's sake,
so
because,
good.
you know, if you can't beat them, then you gotta, I don't know, I don't mean join them, but
But in a way, yeah, work with them,
yeah,
right?
work with it, right,
Yeah.
right. If
That's
you
so
can't get
good.
rid of it, work with it, right? Teach
It's
teach
so
young
good.
people. Yeah.
That's so good. I know you've got my brain spinning now. I'm like, okay, media literacy, done. We've got to
I
start
know.
working on this. My
I know.
gosh. Well, I love the work you're doing. I could truly pick your brain all day, but we do need to wrap up today. So for today, though, I would like to end the show because this is the Fuel Her Awesome show, Charlotte. I would like to ask, how do you like to fuel your awesome? And that could be literal or metaphorically.
I think I like to a lot these days just put on or put in rather now my earbuds
Mhm.
and listen to a good book and either go on a walk or go on a
I
run
love
or
it.
even just do something around the house. That's just been my sanity sometimes is just go through books really fast lately.
That sounds so calming to me
It's like
right
the
now.
only thing this last week or so, I was really noticing the start of the school year had my anxiety kind of amped up. But every time it's like I put headphones in, even if I'm folding laundry, I'm
Yeah.
like, just feel better now. I'm just
Yeah.
paying attention to this like fun story and
It's
feel
so
better.
good. I love that. Well, thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you for being here today. And hopefully, this won't be our last conversation.
No, I hope not. I hope not.
I'm so glad you were here today. Let's do yourself a favor and write down at least one actionable item that you can take away from today's episode to start fueling your awesome. Here on the show, we scratch the surface of empowered eating, but if you're looking to dive in deeper, I would love to help you out with that. Head over to jessbrownrd.com. You can check out my free empowered eating workshop. You can take a free quiz to see if your eating style aligns with your values, or better yet, book a discovery call with me to learn more about how to further your empowered eating journey. I cannot wait to be in your ear again, cheering you on along the way. Until then, cheers and happy eating.